This is a different setup than what I did last time, Jay.
That's why it's a test.
Apparently.
Looks like it worked.
Okay, so okay.
All right,
I
7
don't, I don't
o'clock.
have to, I don't have to enter that login information anymore. I just click on the,
Every once in a while, it'll remember it. And then right when you get used to it, remembering it, it'll forget it. And then you're scrambling to try to find the login.
gotcha. All right.
Hey, guys, I just got an emergency phone call from my mom's nursing home. Can I just step out and go answer this and see what's going on?
Sure,
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm here, but I'll be right back.
okay.
And then you had Peter trying to get in.
Oh, yep. Now that's, Brian, you have the controls now, so you'll have to.
Yeah, I got him. He's in.
And don't forget to record to the cloud.
Oh, when Mr. Damasio tells me I should start the recording, I will.
Okay, let's begin then.
All
Hit the
right.
record button.
We are recording.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the Town of South Kingstown Planning Board. This is a work session. The date is Tuesday, January 22nd, 2021. The time is 7:01.
January
First-
12th.
12th.
Excuse me, 2020, January 12th, excuse me, 2021. Okay, first item on the agenda is roll call. Pam, nice to have you back, and we'll assign you your duty again.
Thank you. Thank you. I missed you all. Maria Mack,
Here.
Paul Jordan,
Here.
Joe Murphy,
Here.
Steve Tomasi,
Here,
Peter DiStefano,
Here.
Susan Axelrod is here, and Pam Rubinoff here.
okay, thank you very much. First item on our agenda tonight is discussion of the revisions to the proposed new section 502.7 of the zoning ordinance creating cottage communities. Staff, would you like to take us into
Yeah,
that?
Chairman, if I may, we did send out a revised copy, and I'll just highlight the primary changes between last month and this month associated with that. The first primary change is in the, in essence, first page under B, middle of that paragraph, unless proposed cottage community development is within the town's historic overlay district as defined by Article 6, subsection 600 of the zoning ordinance. So that was a revision made in consultation with the Historic District Commission. Just bear with me, I'm trying to get back my Zoom screen. And the Historic District Commission staff and conversations on the potential implications within the historic district. Staff did feel comfortable that the historic district would have retained all their approval capabilities, but it was simpler and it didn't affect the overall character of the proposed reg change, just add that simple language. And we did do that in consultation with legal counsel.
Jamie, in the future, if we designate a part of Main Street as historical, would that automatically be incorporated under that? Or would we have to add it?
It could, but I think as you move forward, you would have Historic District 1, Historic District 2. And if you were making a zone change to a map to have a new historic district, you could make the decision of which districts included and which district it excluded during that revision.
Okay,
So yeah, it's something to not lose sight of. If you establish another historic district, whether you intend to have cottage regs applicable to that zone or exempt them from that zone. That's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We also talked last month a little bit at length about architectural standards. There's kind of three facets to this discussion. And I'm gonna talk about the first two. The first deal with the actual architectural standard with regards to material. So I know Peter DiStefano and I spoke about this with regards to coming up with a standard, and Peter was going to graciously look at some like real hard technical standards of the actual mill thickness of materials. And when Peter and I talked about this, we came up with the approach that we know certain manufacturers that have certain high quality materials that may replicate wood. And Peter was at least comfortable with naming those. And in essence, when we say and/or paintable material such as, we rep Certainteed Signature Series, which is a higher end vinyl product. They also have a Cedar Shake. That's an extruded vinyl product, but from the street, you wouldn't be able, and almost an untrained eye would not be able to tell the difference between that Cedar Shake in a extruded vinyl product or molded product versus an actual Cedar Shake that could be cement fiberboard or hardy plank. The other aspect is, hardy plank would also be perfectly acceptable. And the other aspect to that was a discussion on vinyl fence material. We actually called that, if I can, in section I1, if everybody has the regs, the reference I made to Certainteed Signature Series Cedar Impression Siding Projects or AZEK paintable trim material is contained in section I1, second bullet. And that's on page 3. It was to fencing material, and there was this, and that's on the page 4, about halfway down the page, section item number 3, where it's an example of AZEK Walpole outdoor fence products. And I think there was a discussion that there are certain manufacturers that do a high quality extruded PVC product that is paintable, that would be perfectly acceptable versus the shiny reflective vinyl fence posts you may find at a national wholesale lumber yard, without calling the 2 big box chains that by name. There's only 2 of them. Still having the provision within there that a chain link fence within the development would be prohibited.
Jamie, I'm just wondering about, and I'm not seeing it now, that the fence has to be a certain kind in terms of, do you have to be able to see through it, or it doesn't really matter? It could be like a stockade fence, but as long as it's nice material, or.
So there's 2, and another commission member had a similar question to that, Pam, that we discussed within the last week regarding fences. So in essence, there's 2 potential types of fences on a cottage type, and that is a privacy or screening fence, which would be solid in nature, and the other is a type of decorative fence associated with delineating a private versus semi-private yard. And I mentioned there's 3 facets to the changes right now. The 2 are those architectural standards, and the third I'm going to discuss when I pull up the bulletin to use that as a sample. So in essence, Pam, to your point, there could be a 6-foot tall solid screening fence material, or an AZEK replicable type fence material may be appropriate to screen a parking space, which is allowed under the regulations. But you're not looking at privacy or privy fences between units that are 6 feet tall. The intent is the units share commonality and common space together, and they're not divided by these, a house, a 8-foot tall privacy fence, then 5 feet in a house, and then another privacy fence. Those are intended to look as common units and function.
Okay. Thank you.
Any type of decorative fence within separating a common area from a semi-private area associated with the unit would be limited to 3 feet tall.
Great.
Hey, Jamie, on that note, I was thinking about the 3 foot tall. A lot of times the fence panels come 3 foot high. And builders can typically, or whoever's installing them, typically bring it off the ground a few inches. So I was thinking if we adjusted it to 42 inches,
Or
People
3,
don't have-
3, 6, okay.
cut their fence down.
Does
Yeah, that
anyone-
makes it easier to trim without damaging the fence.
Does anyone see an issue with increasing it from 36 inches to 42 inches?
I don't have an issue.
Ryan, can you give me screen share capabilities?
Yep.
Or I may actually have,
You got it? It looks like you have it.
should have it. Let's see. Okay. Just bear with me on which PowerPoint I need here. Okay. So can everyone kind of see this area, this slide?
Mm-hmm.
Or I can go back to a non-PowerPoint presentation and blow it up. Is everybody comfortable looking at this?
I can see it okay. Everybody
Okay.
else?
Can you see my cursor as I move my cursor around?
Yes.
Okay. So we added within this discussion, if there's a common space, or we'll call it in essence, a miniature town common or green associated with the cottages, there's typically a sidewalk or an interrelation between a public space, and then we've added a semi-private space, either before you enter the porch or just outside of a porch. So the sidewalk isn't immediately at the stoop of the home, that there's some intermediate area between there. And that area is to be no more than 15 feet. And you'll see that, I'm gonna exit this for a minute and go back to the Word document.
Jamie, is this a flyer you're going to print or just have it online?
We would be able to have it as a printout that we could hand out.
Okay.
You know, we
Because
would have-
my only comment when looking at the handout you gave us with the dimensions that you have, like the common space and then the 10-foot separation on those cottages, it's a little blurry. I thought maybe it was just because the printing quality, but if you could brighten that font somehow.
Yeah, I can work with Union Studios to clean that up.
It's very difficult to read, especially that 10 feet separation. At least I thought so.
Also, on both the handout that you sent to us, it doesn't give you a total square foot area for what those two buildings are on. I'm looking at the handout, which is similar to the well, actually, it's that center, that same as that center drawing.
Okay, I'll go back to that in a second, Maria. so
Okay.
the Site of that comment. So in the regulations, item H is kind of new from last month, and it's really this transitional area. So you own your house, then you have a porch associated with that, and then there's a transitional zone between, in essence, your porch and a public space to give a little bit of relief from a public area. You would typically have that in any development in town where you have the town road, town sidewalk. There's a little bit of room before you enter a porch on a house, and that's usually done by the town setback or an established setback within a community. This is pretty standard with the cottage regulations, and Union Studios, and as well as Jeff Davis and I discussed it and came up with this language. So again, it acts as a transitional zone between where the public feels comfortable, and there's a kind of this little buffer between the public space and you're actually on someone's front porch. Maria, I'll go back to that PowerPoint slide. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just not go to the presentation, but enlarge this. So you're talking about in the center of this slide, Maria?
Yeah, I mean, more specifically, it relates back to the conversation we had the last time we discussed this, which is how the parking, the open space, the buildings fit on a particular lot, because when we were looking at the actual numbers, because we really haven't until I would say this point had a lot of drawings as far as architecturals, but we haven't had any diagrams that demonstrate how you would fit X amount of cottages on a lot, whether it's an acre or what have you, because you may recall that when we looked at it last time, the 15 lots per acre didn't add up mathematically.
Okay, if you see at the bottom of the screen that I have cottage development examples and cottages cover page, I'm going to switch over to this slide, which is an expansion of that. So, I'm just going to go through a few. This is a development, actually was built. It's in Redmond, Virginia. Its total lot size is 69,000 square feet. So that's about 1.5 acres, and density of 8 units per acre. And there are 12 homes on that acreage with an average of 1,000 square feet. And I have a few of these, so I'm going to run through them and we can go back to any one of these. This is that actual development in a 3D elevation. This is another development. And the screen isn't a lot. This one is in Kirkland, Washington. Again, I'll go through a few of these. Again, you have, this is a little over 2 acres, 2.25 acres. It has a unit density of 7 per acre, total of 16 units. These range from a little over 600 square feet to 1,500 square feet. And on the right is the sample of the architecture associated with this. Again, I'm just going to go in and out because I got another example from Bainbridge Island, Washington. Everybody's comfortable. I won't go back and forth. If you want me to expand anything, let me know and I'll increase the range so you can view it better. This one's on 39,000 square feet. It's 12 units per acre.
Jamie, we're not seeing it. We're seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, you had it on and then flip back.
Is this better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is 39,000 square feet, just under an acre. It's built in a 12 unit per acre density. Total number of homes are 11. They range right around 1,100 square feet. And that gives you the configuration. This one's a good one because if you look at this is almost a square. So it's roughly 200 by 200 would give you 40,000 square feet. And that gives you an idea of what fits on an acre, a builder's acre. A true acre is 43,560. But again, a builder's acre is 40,200 by 200. It gives you a good example there. The next slide that I have, and a few of you may have actually gone to this one. This is the development in East Greenwich. It's 15 2-bedroom cottages on 0.85 acres on 48 Green Street. This one was done by Union Studios. It's just adjacent to Main Street. This is an aerial photo of the built project. You'll see in the center of the photo, they're a common green. All of the units face the common greens, parking's to the rear, abutting a CVS. This is what the site looked like pre-development. You'll notice just above the little push pin for 48 Green Street, you'll see a single family home with a pool. And there used to be, this is the driveway. It looks like a long building, but it's actually the driveway with the garage right where the push pin is. And then next to that used to be a commercial garage associated with storage and some repair business. This is a 3D Google image of that site. We just talked about the garage at the push pin, the driveway, an existing single family home, and pool. So a few commission members have asked, what will this type of development look like next to a traditional single family house and perhaps a half-acre zone? And this is a fair example of what it may look like. This is slightly higher density than what our regulation are. Sorry.
Amy, it looks like this includes multi-units, buildings.
Right, they're connected. They're not separate units.
They're actually on the lower portion of, so there's a duplex unit in the larger house, 2 main houses facing the street. You go to single family on the lower portion of the house, there's 3 single family units. Then there's a triplex.
Yeah.
On the upper part, it's a duplex, duplex, duplex. I have some pictures of this development. This is what the development looks like from the street. So even though this is 2 duplex units right and left from Google imagery. This is the view of that single family home with the pool in the background, looking in a westerly direction towards the 2 duplex units at the street. They have a similar scale and bulk to the existing unit. Again, that single family unit and where their pool is, that pool used to overlook a commercial garage, the back end of it. So, without having access to the owner, I don't know what their opinion is of if their view is enhanced or not enhanced. Probably the primary change they had to deal with is that garage didn't have any windows or residential footprint associated with it. So no eyes looking into their backyard versus now they have units with windows and decks looking into their backyard. The next slide that I have is that little rectangle. This is in West Concord, Massachusetts. It's there's 2 primary downtown areas in Concord, Massachusetts. There's Main Street, which is central to the town, and this is the western edge. It's the second train stop for the MBTA coming out of Boston. And you'll see these are typically about 10 to 15,000 square foot lots. And there's a little cottage development in that red area. That one. This is a close-up of that development. This is 9 units on just under 2 acres. And from that, it's a cut and paste, same scale to a property located off of Oak Street within the town of South Kingstown. So if you're looking how 9 units would potentially sit on a site just off a high street, and if I hit escape for a second, I'll go back to our screen. That's the underlying use. Again, there's a house there. There aren't too many vacant pieces, but this was an attempt to show you here's a traditional single family neighborhood, bike trails right next to it, and you could potentially, with the dimensional requirements contained in the regulations, we'll say 8 or 9 units would fit on a property like this. If you want to look at scale, you can move this around. And actually what I did, I'll do it one last time. And I'll get a closer view for everyone. Here is a traditional development called Stonebridge Drive. This is that same development from Concord. Here you
We're
have.
not seeing it again, Jamie.
So traditional, and okay, right here on Stonebridge Drive, you have 6 lots, traditional short cul-de-sac. And I'll go back out again. I'm going to drop the Concord development on top of that. to the top left of the screen, 8 or 9 units comfortably fits where 6 may be. So I think, that's the type of infill you'll potentially see in town. I have I have one more example, a decent 3D rendering. This one's from Colorado. The units are 800 to 1,300 square feet, and the density is about 12 units per acre. This one shows 9 units on 3/4 of an acre. And again, the nice thing about this photo is it shows traditional single lot development just to the right of it. Here, there is one larger lot, 3 lots that have been combined and actually have a condo project on it. So again, here's, we'll say 1970, 80 development where someone combines 3 lots, builds one large condo unit. There's no common space. It's basically the 3 units, parking. An alternative to that is the cottage. And then let's go down a couple. Again, some of the architectural samples we looked at. I did shorten the chimneys for Peter. And a couple, just looking at 4 of those in a row. So does anyone have any questions or like me to expand on some of the items I showed you this evening?
I had a couple of questions. Of the examples that you showed us, how many of them were located so that they were in a kind of central core area where they can walk to goods and services, which was one of the major topics of where to locate these type designs?
The West Concord one, Maria, is. And let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Out of it. So the West Concord one, this is the development, and the commercial area is just to the, in essence, it's the northeast of this development. There are sidewalks linking this main road to this development. One thing that's interesting about this one is impact. There are 2 commercial buildings, office buildings in front of this, but there is, in Concord, the price point of this home right here would be about 1.4 million in this downtown setting. They didn't have a view of this before. This is the view that they have now. These homes to the left here are in the price point of 1.6 million apiece. Again, different price point, but you have that single family, large scale home that the character of what their neighborhood may be perceived as changed.
Of course, that's also within the 128 corridor, so values up in that area are pretty high.
Yeah, Concord is a beautiful place, Maria.
But also an area where you'd want to have some housing available to, younger families.
Yes, with that walkable, close to downtown aspect.
Maria,
The other one, Maria, is the one in Redland. Again, you could say the one in West Greenwich is close to.
Redmond, right.
Yeah, this one in Redmond was relatively close to the downtown.
Jamie, the one in East Greenwich on Green Street, can we see that again? Was the parking? The parking is also in one spot for that development?
Parking in one spot for that. I'll try and just bear with me. I'm going to take, if everybody would like, I won't. I can take you to another development using Google Earth and just kind of show you when you're doing the cottage type developments, a lot of times you're going to have these isolated parking areas where literally it may be a couple 100 feet to walk to your unit. And there's an example off of 495 in Massachusetts where they did that. And, I had an opportunity to talk to a few residents there, and initially they thought it would be inconvenient to, they almost had to convince themselves that was a good thing to buy into this type of development and walk every day, but they understood their walk from the car to their unit was kind of an alone, quiet time to de-stress before you left the office at your car and work. In that little 5-minute walk, you kind of changed mentality between work and I'm at home. You also had an opportunity to interact with some of the residents within the community versus you drive in. I mean, I do it every day. In essence, you drive in, you open your garage door, you go into your house, and there's no interaction or limited interaction with the community or neighborhood you actually live in.
Well, Jamie, that was something that I actually was thinking about on the, and I don't know, you know, we're jumping back and forth to different things, but on the guidance, that I was just wondering, there was no mention that I saw, either in pictures or in text or in dimensions. There was nothing with regards to parking or garage. And again, I'm not quite sure if this is, you say design guidelines bulletin number 1. Is there only going to be one bulletin for the cottage community? That's what I'm assuming, but I don't know that answer. But I just thought that since parking is such a big issue, we might want to say something about that in the design guideline, in the brochure. I don't know, that's just a thought.
There is a reference within the design guidelines that if you do a garage, it doesn't prohibit a garage, but if you do a garage, it has to mimic the character and architecture of the buildings you're building. So
Was that in the handout?
that's contained within the regulations.
No,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that I didn't see anything in the handout.
No, in the
regards to
two,
parking.
in essence, in the 2-page handout, it doesn't discuss garages within that.
Okay, then I was just wondering if we ought to put anything about parking or garages or something like that in the handout. So that was just a question or thought.
I mean, potentially what we could do in that handout, and it may be one thing the handout is lacking, is one of the, I can work with Union Studios and if we pick one classic, perfect rectangular development and says, this is what represents a cottage community. Maybe it's just this rectangle, the lower rectangle here, or we're looking at this is a cottage development. In some communities, you would see these units here may have an underneath garage. Some of the communities will end up in the East Greenwich example, that this may become a garage.
Yep.
And if you're with me, if everybody would like, I could take you potentially the 2 developments in the Massachusetts area that just show you an example of that. I think I can get to them quickly using Google Earth. The only thing I don't know is using the VPN. Jay and I have this experience using the VPN and a presentation and going to a different format sometimes makes us crash on Zoom. So if I did, I'm not intentionally doing that.
Jamie, while you're looking for that, the cottages are excluded from accessory apartments. But when we talk about a garage, is there any language that would, or is it prohibited if somebody has a 1-car garage and they want to finish it?
If someone has a 1-car garage,
Say
and
it's not the original owner, it's been sold, and they said, oh, I'd like to have more living space. Would they be allowed under this cottage units to take that garage and expand their living space?
I think the difficulty there, in most instances, it's going to be a condo association. You're going to own the lot, and I would say most HOAs are going to prohibit that conversion of the apartment. And in most instances, the developer is going to be pushing up against their density calculations. So if someone added a unit, it's going to run amok of the density calculations that you approved.
Okay,
Okay,
I'm just thinking of a what if, you know, again, they didn't want the garage, they wanted more living space. Would they be allowed to do it?
I was gonna say, am I still screen sharing?
No,
No,
All right, so just give me a second here and I'll get to my area. So let's see if we can screen share. Ooh. I'm gonna try and do this one other way. Right now, it's not allowing me to share an application, an internet page with your view. So just bear with me 1 minute and we'll try and.
Jamie, can you just put the link in our?
Yeah, I'm just trying to do a screenshot of that area. Now it's just. I apologize, it's not allowing me to share Google Earth, and Google Earth is.
or maybe you can forward us those links that we can look at them after.
Yeah, but again, what some of the developments show is that there's, there's parking in close proximity to the development, some it's a little bit further away. In most instances, the projects have been successful. There's one development in the Harvard, Massachusetts area, which is similar to the ones that I showed you, which have in essence satellite or pocket parking areas. And you walk to the development, they're not intermixed with the development. There's a secondary one that was done out of in the Milford, Mass area, where most of the units are cottage-like, but a good majority of them have garages, and the ones that don't have garages in close proximity to them. But the architecture of the garages is fairly well done. This one, the one project that I can send you a cut sheet on, is really close. I wouldn't want to replicate it in town, but it's a good example to take some of the forms from.
I would think with the separate.
Really
parking-
dense, and everybody wants a covered garage and a covered parking garage also.
I would think with the separate parking, the housing is more in like a park-like atmosphere,
Yes,
because you're all basically.
gives you
facing-
more flexibility, Steve.
Mm.
Jamie, is there any association between where you're seeing garages? I think most of the examples that you have shown us have not been, but so any correlation between garages in areas that are, say, in the Worcester Snow Belt kind of region versus
Yeah,
Washington State or Virginia?
a lot of it, Maria, and I think if we had Donald Powers here and Jeremy Lake, they would agree with me. They're driven by market conditions. And in some areas, the price points are so high that you can drive the market condition by the style of your development. In other areas, you're competing with the market. And if the market's giving you 2-bedroom condos with a garage and you're in that same market, you may be looking at a cottage setting in order to compete with that market that has the ability to have a garage. Because again, you're competing with that market. But I think that the design parameters are there and are important so that, if you do a nice little 10-unit cottage development, that the parking facility isn't 20 parking garage doors facing something, and it just completely destroys the aesthetics of what you're trying to accomplish. I think you have the design criteria contained within the regs to do that.
Amy, you think there's any way that like a covered parking area could fit into that? Open on the sides, just. So there might be a challenge.
You got the carport aspect of something.
Yeah.
I've seen it done both ways, primarily when you're getting into condo projects. I think what a lot of the developers are doing, there's a really nice one in Milford, Connecticut, shoreline communities, affluent like South Kingston, similar price point to South Kingston, where the developer, for security reasons, initially looked at open carports, and then because they were doing slab construction, there was no storage. So you get into the discussion of, if I'm a younger family, where do I put a bike or a stroller? Where do I put those things that I would normally put in my basement? So that developer tended towards doing the enclosure. And some of them ended up not being for the car, but ended up being the bike storage and the stroller storage, canoe, kayak. A lot of people are moving to these smaller houses are still extremely active. They're the adventure type, outdoors type. They still want to bike and kayak. And if you build a cottage development, where do you keep the kayak? Where do you keep your mountain bike?
The cottages on Green have full basements. I think they're all walkout. If I remember correctly.
And again, depending on topography and groundwater conditions,
Yeah.
these can all have basements, and that resolves some of the issue. But Paul, I've seen it both ways, and I've seen it done aesthetically well both ways.
Okay.
Jamie, could you just show us the last drawing that was like a pen and ink, and it showed 4 different architectural styles, yet they blended in pretty well?
Yes, I can do that. This one, Maria?
Maybe.
It would help if I shared the screen, right?
Mhm.
Sorry about that.
Yes, that's it.
One you were discussing, yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because it showed diversity in terms of the design, yet they all, you could see them fitting in within a development. So I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting.
And I think there are 2 aspects, Maria, you bring up a good point that, the handout is part regulatory along with the words. There's nothing, and Amy, correct me if I misspeak, because we do have legal counsel here. I don't think there's anything preventing the commission from, in addition to the written text in essence, the 2-page guideline, front to back guideline with a cover page and a back page, to also providing a prospective applicant some direction with what the commission has found to be as appropriate architecture, and we can build upon a portfolio as time goes on. So I see this as the beginning of a much larger portfolio that we can build upon.
Yeah, so here's what I would say to that, Jamie. This is Amy Goins, legal counsel. Anything that we adopt as an ordinance has the force of law. If we want to assemble a portfolio for guidance purposes, that's fine. I would just say, let's think about whether or not we want to have a separate document with, here's examples of the kinds of developments we'd like to see existing outside of the ordinance versus in the ordinance. I think probably it makes more sense to me that it would not be in the ordinance itself, that it would be separate. But we can think about that as we assemble that.
I like that idea because you could update it.
Yeah,
Without
that's
having to go
what I'm
back and
thinking.
change the whole ordinance. If a new project came online somewhere and did an outstanding job, you could load that in to your examples without having to have hearings.
Yeah,
Amy, this is Brian Wagner. I actually just looked this up because this was one of my long-standing irritants with the Administrative Procedures Act, is that for years, a guidance document was technically a rule that had to be promulgated and adopted in accordance with the APA. And I just noted that a couple of years ago, they changed that and added a section on guidance documents.
Yeah.
I would really like to see this have some kind of teeth in support of the ordinance, even if it's not technically an ordinance, because I love pictures, that they are extremely helpful. Should we, if we're going to use this as a guidance document, would it be advisable for us to have some kind of statement to go with it, explaining how it should be used?
The problem is, and the overhaul of the APA, the problem with that is there's not really an analog to guidance documents, right? The APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, is a state law that governs regs promulgated by state entities. It doesn't apply to municipal ordinances. In the hierarchy of laws, right? Putting aside the Constitution, but let's say at the top of the hierarchy, there's the comp plan in town, the zoning ordinance below that, and the subdivision regulations. There's nothing below that, and all of those have the force of law. The comp plan really, I won't say to a lesser extent, but it plays a different role. The zoning ordinance and the subregs are black and white. The statements shall make them binding. There's not really a legally defined place, I think, for guidance documents of that type, as there are with state agencies and the APA. I would want to look at examples of some ordinances in Rhode Island that have similar documents, and the best thing I could think of now is what the HDCs do, right? The HDCs have ordinances that have standards and guidelines, but then typically they do publish something that looks a lot and functions a lot like a guidance document, what you're talking about. But the reality is, whatever we want to make mandatory should be in the ordinance. If we have a model handbook of, best practice examples, things that we'd like to see, that I wouldn't consider, I don't think needs to be in the ordinance. I think that's just something separate.
And Steve, to the point in Amy's making, a lot of times in my career, when an applicant has come in that initial meeting, they're, hey, I read the village regulations, I read your design guidelines, and the next comment from them is, what is the commission really looking for? Is there an example of what they would like to see in the community? that may be a discussion of handing them 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 examples, just like I was going to try to do with you on Google Earth is, show them, the commission. I showed this commission one in Redland. They liked it. It's not in the reg, but here's a good example. They liked the one in Greenwich. They liked it, but here's what they didn't like about it. These are leads to discussions that I can have with an applicant about what some of the expectations are from a commission beyond the written words of a regulation contained within a paragraph.
Yeah, and it would save a lot of time for the planning board and the applicant if they had an idea what we were looking for and what we didn't like. So that, you weren't coming to heads with conflict from the get-go.
Yeah, so if they ask me about architecture, we have photographic examples, but, we could, again, build upon this for home portfolio and say, here's what they look like lined up. And I have other examples. I have a couple streetscapes where I've done this. But again, it's a discussion and we can build upon it so that I'm communicating the right message to a potential developer, articulating the vision of the board, not Jamie Rabbit's vision, but the board's vision for what the.
So Jamie, this is Paul. So looking again at cottage building and fence design standards, variety in building design, materials, varying roof shapes, gables, windows of visible trim and mullions, roof brackets, dormers, bay windows. I mean, it seems like an awful lot of what we're saying is covered there, and then your guidance document is just that. These are examples of things that we would like to see. I guess my question for the rest of the board is, do we think there's enough language there in that section, or do we need to, read it through and think about it a little bit more? I think it certainly makes it clear what's expected in terms of variety of and the types of materials, but again, I'm new at this. So.
Yeah, Paul, some of the,
But and that's why it's nice to have a visual to correlate all those regulations to.
Right, but I mean, just the idea that the visual can be in the guidance, which doesn't have, it's not part of the ordinance, but the ordinance still makes it clear what we're looking for.
And, I think the definition of the ordinance is going to be important so that it is well worded enough that an applicant won't look at it and then come in and start asking for waivers from all of these wonderful things that we would like to see in these cottages.
some of the difficulty is, and the visuals really help me articulate your vision and your expectations, because a developer will, again, not all applicants are created equal, just like planners and commission and board members, that a developer may come in and say, look, I have a dormer and a bay window, thumb up, am I good to go? And we're going to look at, as staff, I'm going to look at that development and having the ability to say, yes, you have a dormer and yes, you have a bay window, but that's not exactly what the commission's looking for. That's not the intent of the regulation. Let me show you some samples of what the commission has deemed to be appropriate. And again, with samples and language, you can make a cottage that's a 40-page document regulatory. And I don't think, Amy and I are steering you in that direction, that you have good language contained in 4 or 5 pages. You have a good 2-page guiding document that tries to articulate some of the words. But I don't think it hurts you. It actually helps you to have some other examples of your, articulating that vision and what's potentially acceptable.
Can we go back for a minute and go back to density? Because I kind of feel that, if you're trying to put too many houses on a lot, everything else starts falling apart. And I look at what you sent us, Jamie, and thank you for all those examples. And I look at the ones with Kirkland, which had 7 units per acre, and I thought that looked really good. I looked at the Redmond that had 8 units per acre. I thought that was good. And then you had the Brainbridge, which was 12 per acre. And I think that could work, but that to me seems to be the upper end. When you got into the East Greenwich, which was or whatever that was, 18 units or so. To make that work, they had to have a large parking lot. They end up have minimal buffers. The houses are very linear. They have multi-units. To me, that starts losing what we're trying to accomplish. And I don't know how everybody else feels, but from those examples, in my mind, the 12 units was probably the upper limit, or at least that was from me.
I was about to say the same thing. I very much like the Kirkland, Washington one. And I also liked it because it wasn't a one big square. I thought that made for a better design.
This one, Maria?
No,
It's just
it was called Kirkland.
Okay, and one of the other,
Kirkland, that, oh,
maybe.
I think.
Kirkland was
Keep
7
going.
units per acre, I think.
It had sort of a stack, that one.
This one.
I thought it was interesting because it wasn't sort of this monotonous square in terms of that, the site plan itself. But again, I think the big issue is what is going to be a workable, appropriate density, and where, location wise, in what districts will these be allowed? I know we talked at the last meeting about having some kind of I don't think we called it floating, but we called it a district within village core areas or something like that. But I agree very strongly with what Joe had to say, and really think that it's got to be below 12 for it to be successful, and for there to be buy-in from the community as well.
Again, I like this design because the open space for the units, and again, the parking is kind of offset. It's not in front of every unit. And I can live with 12 per acre. I mean, that would.
Well, this is
loosen it up a
7,
little, give
this
us-
is 7 per acre. This
Well,
one.
no, I'm referring to Joe's recommendation.
Well, Jamie had another one. I think it was the Bainbridge, Washington, which was 12. I don't know, Jamie, if you could put that one back up.
This is 12 per acre.
It was a Bainbridge, I think. There it is.
Hmm.
To me, this seems to be the upper limit. Might even be over the limit, but
Yeah.
certainly better than the East Greenwich example, where we really didn't have much room to put greenery at all.
One of the keys that you have to recognize is when you get to this density, and one of the premises under the cottage instinct is you're really looking at this in 2 aspects. What does the community look like that people live in? And that's where the houses are. And then because we're in an auto-driven society, due to work requirements, and we're not in an urban downtown setting, people are reliable on how do we best configure that? So again, this is a 40,000 square foot lot. So it's just under a true acre at 43,560. But with that comes cars. And here, what's interesting is, you have 4 parking spaces, you have 8 on this side. There, if you actually look, there are lockers here. So we talked about some storage units, and they tucked them into small little lockers. This is probably a shed that has doors associated with them. But again, here you have 11 homes, and you have
About 18.
16 parking spaces. So it's just under 1.5 spaces. And again, we don't know and again, I pulled this one late today, and I didn't have a chance to go pull the Google imagery to it and show you a real how this fits within the community. But you have to look at what is the feel of the residential. We can hide and design this. This is one where this is kind of the East Greenwich. It's one block of parking. It's one bay of parking. This is discussion of, here there are pockets designed, but this is a 2.25 5-acre site, you'll be hard pressed to find 2.5 acres in your downtown setting. So this is going to push the peripheral of your downtowns.
So I think,
This is-
again, these are all great examples. And I think that the ordinance needs to be very specific about, you know, certain kinds of things, of what the minimums are, what the intent is. And then it comes into review. You know, we could put some examples, an example in the design guideline of a certain kind of thing and say, this is what we're looking for, but we can't predetermine what all of them are going to be. So I think that we have to be careful not to pigeonhole ourselves and the developers to one specific model, but I think that we just have, you know, these are really good examples to say, okay, this is what we're looking for in terms of density, in terms of guidance, in terms of regulations and look, but we just have to be careful though that we're, you know, that we're not being too prescriptive.
Yeah, Pam, to your point, if you make it too difficult, an applicant
They're
may
not gonna
just
do it.
they
Yeah.
may just permit you, and then the architectural standards are gone.
Yeah,
The design and open space are gone, and they're just going down a different path.
exactly. So
Tammy, you muted yourself.
that we've spoken about this before, that we're going to have to try something and then we could adapt it. But if we keep on, you know, if we keep on going around ourselves, you guys have done a great amount of work. Peter, you've given some great input. Everybody has provided input. So I think that we just have to, I don't know, move on to try to finalize something, because otherwise we're gonna, I mean, we could rethink this time and time again. So my concern is that we need to identify those key things. I put in some very clear guidance or regulations, put in some images that reflect some of those things that we're saying, and see where it takes us, I have to say, but because we do get review from it.
Well, Jamie, let's take into consideration for the inclusionary. So if the density is 12 per acre, is that with the inclusionary or plus the inclusionary? And that's something we should, got to make sure we're clear on.
Amy, how would we view that from a legal standpoint?
So this is Amy. Remember that for inclusionary zoning, we need to provide a density bonus, right? Inclusionary zoning isn't just a requirement that you have to build, that some of your units have to be deed restricted. It's a requirement to construct LMI housing units in exchange for a density bonus.
So,
If you go down to your 12 units an acre and you add the density, you're back to the 15.
so that's something we got to take into consideration, because anything over 6 units, they're gonna have to do it inclusionary.
Or you're looking at 9 per acre, which gets you to the 12, which that's the number Joe mentioned.
Yeah,
You know, again, we have, I think, been thorough in terms of the detail, the layout, the architecture, the common space. But at this point, we do need to focus on the density and the location. I mean, given the fact that it's going to be a 20% bump up, I believe 7 is a good way to begin in terms of units per acre, or 8.
I think Maria's right, and I think.
yeah, I would concur that I would go with 8, and go ahead, Paul.
I was just gonna say, I think because this is new, it's probably an easier sell to the community to say, look, we're not trying to jam in something outrageous on a lot. Even if you get the density bonus, it's still within reason. So if you go 7 or 8 and then you get a bonus from there, it can look and fit in really well.
I'm good with 8 and the density bonus that would bring you up to 10.
Peter, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, I like the 12.
I did too, until we started discussing the inclusionary, and then it starts getting tighter and tighter,
Mhm.
which, we can always go up. You can't go down.
I'm gonna just
Well, we
screen
can,
share, go back to those densities, so. I want to say exclude the parking and just look at the residential aspect. This is 12 units per acre. We'll say, the road is on the right-hand side, sidewalk, green. You're kind of, if this was single-family neighborhood, you're maintaining a streetscape minus the parking lot. I'm trying to go up. There we go. Again, this was,
Sorry.
which is probably your optimum, but 16 homes on 2 acres.
That is optimum. Yes.
Redland was 8. Here you have 8. But again, Greenwich is tight. Greenwich is 15 units on 0.5 acres. And I use this because it's a local example.
Yeah.
The community potentially welcomed it because you saw what was there before.
Yep.
It's a transitional zone between the commercial and the residential. And that's one thing. I had a board member ask me a question in the past couple of weeks about what if someone wanted to do 3 units within a cottage, or what if they want to do 4 together, but it maintained a scale and look of the cottage industry. And remember, we're talking about the missing middle. So we probably have, A through F on housing types within the missing middle. We're doing A right now. B and C and D will come. And there's potential as you develop B, C, D and type housing, you realize there's a cottage reg that may be a version and a B version where a higher density in a transitional zone, similar to East Greenwich, would be appropriate.
Jamie, you raise a good point about the cottages on Green. We keep referring to them because they were the first one, the local one, but there are a lot of things that, as you said earlier, that I think many of us don't like about them, and they are dissimilar to what we might see here because they were essentially a brownfield site. It was almost, there was a remediation associated with it. It's right on a main street, and it's in a transitional area. So that varies, I think, considerably from many of the others that you have shown us. And it isn't necessarily the best example, I don't think. I don't like the houses that are the cottages that are not true single cottages. And I know that there was a considerable amount of issues with stormwater. They had to go back in and correct many problems because of the impervious area, the slope to the site, and the fact that their internal space was a lot of riprap. So it isn't, even though we're referring to those, that is, in my opinion, not the best example.
But for that location, it
Yeah.
still works pretty well. Behind CVS, the parking is almost unnoticeable. It looks like an extension of CVS. There's a parking lot across the street. And again, it was the first, but I think that one works pretty well right there. If you had a similar transitional area on a main road here in town, rather than on a side road, I think it would work.
I guess I look at this as a really big opportunity for us, not necessarily to look at low to moderate income housing, but to look at like worker housing, like blue collar people and this is one way we can cut the cost of housing in South County and get normal people to live here. So obviously the more density, the lower the price. I mean, we need to control how we do this, and this is one way we can control that. But I mean, in the business community, there are tons of people that talk about how they don't have any employees that live in the town that they work in, which is too bad. And I think this is an opportunity that we need to look at and see and take advantage of.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. Anybody that has help in town knows, and most of them, they don't live in town if they're young.
And it will probably ruffle some feathers of existing town members to some extent, but I mean, if we're trying to really do what we say we're trying to do and get housing low to moderate and get worker housing and get more, I think this is the way to do it. And I used to work with a guy and he used to always say you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. We're going to start breaking some eggs, but
I'm going to show everyone if you can see this. So tell me if everybody can see that. Can everybody see that one?
It's not enlarged, Jamie.
You're still sharing your screen, so.
Let me stop sharing. I figured there was another way to skin the cat here. As if it's not showing very big. That's off the 495 corridor. Just south of Harvard, Massachusetts. So it's north of Shrewsbury, north of Northborough and Southborough.
Hey,
And-
Jay, if you spotlight Peter's window, we'll be able to see it full screen. Jay or Brian?
Peter's or Jamie's?
I'm sorry, Jamie's.
I think it's gotta be Brian, because I don't have that option.
Yeah, spotlight him. Oh, never mind.
Actually, all we need to do is just do a speaker view.
Yeah, if you do you.
There you go.
Jamie, you want to give me the address? I'll pull it up on Google Maps.
Yeah, let me drop a pinpoint. It is,
Yeah, you guys are so multidimensional.
it's Sugar Road in Bolton, Massachusetts. And if you're successful doing that one, Jay, I'll show you the other one in Medfield.
Can you see that on the screen, Jamie?
Yes.
Yes. So go west, left, and south, I believe. Can you go out a little bit, Jay? Keep going. There it is. See the Colonial Candies?
Yep.
There you go. Again, that's a development that has density in the 12 range per acre, but the parking is separated. It's not one big parking field like the East Greenwich example. But again, they have small areas where there's a large common green, and then if you look at the bottom of that screen, there's 6 units around a very small common area. This one is a different interpretation of the cottage regs, but they utilize cottage regs to build this style development.
This is Susan. Can I interrupt for a second?
You're not interrupting, you're part of the meeting.
Thank you. So I believe that 15 per acre is too dense for South Kingstown. And especially since the example that Jamie offered for East Greenwich is in an urban setting, and they were duplexes and triplexes. Here, I think we're talking about potentially inserting this development into maybe established neighborhoods, old neighborhoods in town. And because we're using the future sewer overlay, there are many locations in this town that are just in established old neighborhoods where suddenly you're going to come across this cottage community. And at 15 per acre, I don't feel like it fits. And I think the examples that Jamie gave, which were really good examples, the ones that were out more in a residential neighborhood were 7 per acre. The one downtown in East Greenwich was, what was that, 11 per acre. I'd like to see an example of 15 per acre in a neighborhood, not an urban core. We don't really have an urban core, maybe part of Wakefield. But like the one you just showed us was out in the boondocks. And they had a buffer all the way around the development, where we're going to shoehorn this in with no buffer because there's no room for buffer because there's 15 per acre. So how does that fit in a residential neighborhood with no buffer because it's full of units? And I'd like to see, I guess, an example of how that would fit in our style neighborhood we have in South Kingstown in the future service area.
And the last time we talked about this, Jamie, I forget his name, but the planner who talked about owning property in the Oaks and said, how would you know,
Richard Junkin.
Rich Youngkin, yeah, what would this look like in the Oaks? And you know, Susan's right. I think in a transitional area, these make a lot of sense. In Peacedale, in Wakefield, you know, in old parts of town make a lot of sense, but it would look odd plopped in next to Sweet Allen Farm.
Well, I had that discussion with Jamie on as well, in reference to what Richard had brought up. You know, I kind of envision this like along Kingstown Road, or maybe some of the main thoroughfares, again, all within the sewer and water district. We had a small subdivision up beyond the, I want to say across from Iggy's, across from the agricultural, URI's agricultural farm. That was probably a little over an acre. I mean, an area like that, it would fit in. The Oaks, those lots are all already developed. And as Jamie said, is somebody going to go in and want to tear down a house and then try to redevelop it? Would it make sense? And how much pushback would they get from the planning board and neighborhoods? So would they want that kind of fight going in? And Amy, in a case like that, what kind of standing would we have, or the neighbors have, to object to something like that?
Clarify what the situation is, please.
The Oaks, which is a neighborhood across from the Guild.
Yep.
On 108. I'm not sure if those are half-acre lots in there, but what would stop a developer from buying a house in there, knocking it down, and wanting to put in a cottages?
Yeah, I mean, standing to object, right? If something is permitted as of right, there is no forum for an objection because there is no need for approval. If something is permitted with approval of, you know, by the planning board or the zoning board, there's certainly a forum for an objection. But I'm not sure I understand the question. I think I'm not quite.
Well, again, if there's an existing home in the Oaks, a developer wants to tear it down and put in 10 cottages on that lot that's in an established neighborhood. So obviously there's going to be a lot of pushback from the neighborhood.
Yeah, you know, people always object when it's when you're going denser. It's a different kind of objection when it's vacant property versus previously developed property.
Yeah, and I guess I envision this going on an odd lot or a double lot somewhere. Like I think on Columbia Street, it was a single home was on an oversized lot that was almost an acre or over an acre. So I can see it happening there, but again, happening in the Oaks is it's a different scenario.
And I don't think that we even considered that. I mean, my vision of this was in the central locations within the villages, not in some field out in the middle of nowhere or tearing down a house in a
And that was,
existing neighborhood.
Well, again, it's got to be within the sewer district.
right, but that was the crux of Richard's argument, was that the Oaks is in the sewer district. And so if somebody wanted to do this, we can't really say no, even though it would drastically change the character of that neighborhood. So do we need to refine?
Well, then we're spot zoning.
Okay.
I
don't know.
think Paul, the conversation you're having as a board is a good conversation, but the very nature of the style of development you're contemplating is to fit a perceived need that you've already identified with regards to workers' housing and the ability to allow a developer to potentially build at a higher density in order to drive the market price down or to an affordable rate for the working class, and then also incentivize the 2 affordable units or 20% affordable. The very nature of this density doesn't exist in this format and within your community, where you've identified a need, and this is one of the ways to satisfy that need. In most conditions, a developer is not going to go in on a cul-de-sac and take that 1970, 1980 colonial and decide to put cottages behind it or next to it in a neighborhood that is completely unlike that type of density. So a lot of times the market's going to drive this condition, to Maria's point, within those village or within the peripheral of the village, and not put it out. I showed you that 495 example because that isn't near a downtown. That isn't near that's an automobile centric development on an isolated lot surrounded by woods. It is literally, we use the term spitting distance from a 4-lane interstate highway, but surrounded by some open space. So again, to Amy's point, you're making a practical choice to allow this style of development as a right within the community, so long as you're sewered within that sewer district, so long as you meet the standards contained within the district. And if they meet those standards, they should be approved, because it's in essence an administrative process, so long as they meet the standards. If they meet all of the standards and the neighborhood pushes back and you side with the neighborhood, I would say, Amy, on appeal, the courts would overturn that decision in all likelihood.
What about starting off in a slightly more limited area and then having, I don't know if it would be appropriate with this kind of an ordinance to have either a sunset clause or something that would require us to go back and look at it after X amount of time to reevaluate it. I have always thought that adjacent to the commercial highway on Tower Hill Road would be an excellent place for these types of designs.
How about a special use permit?
Amy?
From my perspective, if you make the permitting
Difficult.
so difficult, I'm going to utilize the comp permit. I mean, that's the pushback you're going to get from a developer, and then you lose those design standards you're so passionate about.
Well, they always have the option to do a comp permit anyway. Hopefully this is going to appeal to an applicant who isn't just going to try to push their way into the comp permit and get waivers from everything.
I agree with you, Maria. You're contemplating a style of development to attract a developer down a path that you've decided is appropriate.
And to attract a particular set of clients as well.
Yeah.
It's not just the developer, it's the people that have an interest in this type of development.
Susan, you had your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. So sorry, Jamie, I do not agree that a developer wouldn't come into an established neighborhood, raise a house and start building on it. And especially for me, I live in Kingston within walking distance of URI. We know there's a housing shortage on campus and a lot of money to be made from students. This, I think, may be ideal student housing. I buy one of these cottages and put my kids in there for the 4 years they're at college. And so I'm living in a neighborhood, my house was built in 1930, but a number of the neighbors' houses were built in the 50s. Small ranch houses on large lots would be a perfect place to buy up, you know, a dilapidated older house, tear it down and start putting in cottages into my established neighborhood and then market them to students. And I think that that would completely change the character of Kingston. I know the village is protected, but that's just the little historic part, not the rest of us who live within walking distance of URI. And I think raising houses and jamming cottages in would be a developer's dream come true. And so I think that either we need to seriously reduce the density of these allowed cottage developments, or make it urban core centric, or put little bubbles on the map of where we think this is appropriate, because I think we're opening a can of worms of having to approve things that's not what we meant. I mean, Steve said it, this isn't what I pictured, but this is what we're letting happen. And this is the only time we're going to have to stop the inevitable project we hate because we didn't have the foresight to prevent it.
Yep. So. Now I'm going to, I mentioned on a established cul-de-sac, because there are a lot of non-cul-de-sac roads within the community that are well-established neighborhood, whether they're associated with High Street or up by URI or surrounding Wakefield or Peacedale. So I was looking at that 1970, 1980 cul-de-sac where someone would, in all likelihood, not be attracted to do that. To your point, you know, URI potentially is an attractive area for a developer to potentially do this. But by entertaining this regulation, someone in the community has at least had some opinion that this is a viable alternative to traditional single lot development. To your point, if you know, there may be more appropriate areas than less appropriate areas in the community, and I think that's where the discussion is. But I think if every area is appropriate until it affects someone's property. So even if you say it's got to be in Wakefield or it has to be close to Peacedale, if you have a single family lot on 10,000 square feet and this is proposed next to you, be prepared for that objection from the person who lives on, you know, in the 10,000 square foot lot neighborhood where someone just bought a 40,000 square foot lot and is going to propose 10 units. It's the very nature of, I go back to my saying, it's the very nature of the type of housing development you're contemplating that is, in essence, in some instances, going to be direct conflict with traditional development in those neighborhoods.
But if we already have a vision of what we see in our minds that this is going to work for this town, I think we need to make sure that we are present in that decision now, rather than be regretful later.
And,
absolutely hear you.
Hindsight is 20/20 too, as well. But how about, do we have if we go back to Joe's suggestion of 8, which would put us a possible 10 with inclusionary, and Maria's idea of a sunset clause to trial it.
And maybe a specific cottage zones, you know, specific to Wakefield and
now I
Peacedale?
think we're getting more and more specific that it's not going to work. I think if you put the sunset clause in, if it goes on a lot that we didn't expect, then that's why we have the sunset clause in there, so that it doesn't happen forever.
Well, this is Paul. I like the sunset clause idea, but I also, you mentioned spot zoning. I mean, so we picked the sewer overlay district, but there's no way to refine that and say what, you know, to be more specific, as Susan is saying, about what we think in terms, you know, that Jamie showed a couple of great examples right in town, you know, old Oakdale Road and the lot off Church Street. I mean, there are places, I think there are a lot of places in town where this works really well, right in town. And I guess, again, I'm new at this. I'm not sure why we can't refine just a little bit where we want to do this. expand it later. If we see that it works and people are receptive to it.
I guess my pushback, one thought I have is like, we're talking about not near URI, which could be great for like grad professors or people that work at the college that could walk to work. We put this in Peacedale. I feel like everyone says, let's just go to Peacedale or Wakefield. It's easy there. It could be college kids there too, right? They drive to URI. So, I think that's going to be an issue. We're going to have to deal with that. Whoever lives in the home, we're going to have to figure that stuff out. So I think if the intent is to build more stuff that we're talking about and fill the density, this is what we're going to have to do. If not, we were ready to sign this 3 months ago.
And back to the affordable housing aspect, that it's supposed to be integrated in the community. So.
Well, I think
everybody should share in that.
Right.
Susan's comments and Paul's comments, I think, are spot on. I think we need to start off carefully. I think if we can do it in a limited sense and then take another look at it, that would be the prudent thing to do. I cannot emphasize enough how correct Susan is with what is happening in Kingston with, older houses just turning into boarding houses, essentially, with, cars parked all over people's lawns. It's a big issue. And I know that it's been somewhat impactful in other parts of town as well, but Kingston is a big problem right now.
Well, I think that's going to be a community problem as Narragansett is going through it. And now they're pretty much built out. It's spreading into South Kingston. We're starting the house on Woodruff Avenue that is an 8-bedroom house.
Right.
And it's been a sorority, it's been a fraternity. And Allen Avenue, I see there's some houses that are sold recently that have URI stickers and out-of-state plates. So it's here. It's not going to go away.
So, Mr. Chairman, listening to the board members, a couple of things. I think there's some fair consensus to say 8 units per acre. The incentive would push per acre. With regards to sunsetting, and Amy, again, correct me if I misspeak, I'm more of a proponent that every regulation is retractable potentially by the board and or which makes a recommendation to the council. I haven't, in my experience for 30 plus years, been involved ever in an adopted regulation that sunsets. You either have a reg that's working, and if it's not working, you eliminate the regulation or you modify the regulation. But to automatically sunset it is a new for me, so I just may be uncomfortable with it. Amy, perhaps you can weigh in on that.
This is Amy. Yeah, sunset clauses are less common with land use, right, with ordinances. It's doable, just less common. Absolutely right, Jamie. Everything is subject to revision, amendment, or deletion. A sunset clause, right, would force the council to take up the issue in 2 years, 18 months, you name the time frame. More common when it's something, I would say, we expect to be an evolving situation. That's up to the planning board if you think that's prudent. As far as for thinking about incentives, just think about what are you trying to accomplish and what incentives are you providing to force developers or steer developers in one direction or another. The special use permit, I would say, is a disincentive, right? People don't like to have to apply for special use permits. They feel it's not, it's a more drawn out process. So as far as a sunset, it's legally doable. I would say a little bit unusual in the land use context.
How long is the process what would we have to do in the way of public hearings to take an ordinance out? Just have a public hearing?
So as a zoning ordinance amendment, right, the public hearing is before the council, and if the council adopted a zoning ordinance amendment with the sunset clause, it would go away unless it was renewed, or, you know, the sunset clause could either be extended or taken out to make it permanent.
I think
Yeah, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, God, it feels like a lifetime ago, but we had the sunset clause with the
school, the housing, right? The school.
the coastal stuff that
With
we
the
put in
building height, and we
height,
had it
yeah.
for pacing and phasing as well.
Because we knew at that, and I can't speak to the pacing and phasing, that was a little before my time, but yeah, with the building height, we knew that that would change based on what the General Assembly would do. We knew they were going to take some action. We just didn't know. You know, this I think is a little bit different. You're really just trying to ensure that unintended consequences don't become too rampant. I think probably the better way to address it versus a sunset clause is really just to make it as narrow as possible, you know, as a starting out experimental thing. And then if it seems to be working the right way, maybe broaden the scope. But a sunset clause is an option.
Well, in reference to Paul's question, how do you allow it in, say, some areas of Wakefield and Peacedale, but say it can't happen in the Oaks? Wouldn't that be spot?
No, so spot zoning, I actually just recently really learned the definition over the summer. It really is, as far as what the courts consider spot zoning, zoning that's inconsistent with the comp plan. So spot zoning doesn't refer to just every instance of where you single out a parcel or parcels or a sub-district. It really, it should have a negative connotation. When you carefully craft a zoning ordinance amendment in a way that's consistent with the comprehensive plan, it will not be viewed as spot zoning. And remember that courts are generally very deferential toward councils and planning boards, as long as your ordinance is supported by some sort of finding of consistency with the comprehensive plan. You've got some good statements of purpose in there. I wouldn't hesitate to carefully craft something.
So that was my next.
So
Look at commercial neighborhood, commercial downtown.
I think that's a great idea if we're not going to go with a sunset clause to, as Amy suggested, you know, make it fairly narrow. And the reason that I had suggested the sunset clause was because, as we all know, then you're forced to take a look at it. Because as you know, we end up down rabbit holes all the time, don't we? Despite our worthwhile work plan that we may have in front of us. But, you know, that's certainly an alternative to start off that way and be very careful as we move forward.
My third part is, again, the consensus, the ability to sunset, and I would be more in favor of not sunsetting, but further refining where these regulations apply to, whether it's, you know, calling out a specific existing zoning district, or in essence, creating a cottage overlay district that may include parts of 138 and 108. But if you call out 138, maybe you have to be within 500 or 1,000 feet of 108. You have to be 1,000 or 500 feet within 138. So they're linear corridors, but they're not going to occur on the half a mile north of 138 in the western portion of town, completely isolated from infrastructure, even if there was sewer there. And again, URI is kind of that unique aspect because a lot of the areas has sewer and water. But again, we can look closely at the limitations and better refine this. So to, number of people mentioned it, it's a well-written reg that could have unintended consequences based on its location. So spend a little time on trying to identify and fine tuning the location these can land in.
And Jamie, are there any fees that could be waived with this type of an application?
You could write a reg that would allow that potentially, or a reduction of fees. You know, we still have legal notice aspects, so unless you're willing to absorb everything, but you could, again, if you're trying to encourage someone to do this, I think it's a gesture, because someone trying to do this is going to be in the six-figure realm for design, engineering, and architecture. So waiving a $500 application fee to me is more of a gesture than something that affects the finances of the applicant.
So it sounds like, Jamie, we need to look at maybe an overlay that includes the commercial downtown and commercial neighborhood, and then maybe have some spurs off of that.
Yeah, so it's kind of a spoke and wheel approach, that the spokes are centered on the core downtown business areas and downtown density from the residential aspect. And there may be a few spokes that head away from there, 108, 138, but they may not touch southwestern portions of the community or northwestern portions of the community associated with URI. That maybe, there are some limitations on that. And you may jump an area because there may be an area by the Amtrak station that this is appropriate for, but there's nothing between Kingstown, that village area by Amtrak, and URI. There's a gap. So there may be some floating areas associated with that. And Amy, we could accomplish that, correct, from a legal standpoint? Process-wise, would we have to re-public hearing if we identified specific areas?
I think what we're talking about now is a major revision to the draft ordinance. So, by the time it gets to the council for the public hearing, it should be in a form that is pretty well set. So I would suggest it probably shouldn't go on to the council if we're going to make real substantial changes at this point.
We do have 3 attendees present. If anyone would like to comment at this time, they could raise their hand. Okay.
Could I ask a question also, just because I don't know? Where did the future service, where did that map, like, how was this map chosen? Like, how is this, I'm looking, I printed it out and I'm looking at the future service area. How was that determined to be the future service area, and how were those lines chosen? Do we know?
Capacity of the sewer system itself, I believe, and elevations.
It's in the comprehensive plan, correct?
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was initially developed as part of the comp plan
And then
process.
there's some specific area both down at the Narrow River, and then also over near Kingston, near the turf fields or on lumber. So that's specifically brought into that as well.
Yeah, Arnold Lumber was brought in because of the APC, the industrial.
So this line was drawn that if you have a house in this space, you should be able to connect a sewer?
It's not always available.
Right.
Only if it's available, you have to connect.
So
Like
if we had,
West Kingston behind the post office, my mother used to live, that's in the future sewer area. And when APC was built 20 years or 25 years ago, we were told we were gonna get water and sewer in those areas, but it never happened. So just because
Right.
you're within that zone doesn't mean it automatically will happen, unless
No,
you
but
want to bring it in yourself.
Yeah, you have to consider it. So even if you don't bring it in, you'll have to do a sewer feasibility study and submit to John Chirac. So it is a mandatory consideration.
so the cottages within the sewer area isn't because we want the cottages to be on sewer.
No, we
Because
do. Because of the density, they'd have to be.
But then this map is too big because there's a bunch of areas, like even here in Kingston, where there is no sewer, but it's still within the map. So it's not really, you couldn't build in all these places because there isn't no sewer availability.
Hmm.
Like,
True.
I just don't understand.
Well, again, for the project, the industrial project in West Kingston, it was $750,000 to put the water and sewer lines in. The developer decided not to do it.
Right.
So that's the feasibility of it too. It won't happen if it's price, if the cost per unit is that high.
Yeah,
So-
Susan, the future service district also allows a developer who's inside of that, the option of connecting. Okay. And
Do
I-
you think that we had the mindset of where there were existing sewers when we first envisioned this?
Potentially existing or the ability to tie in within a reasonable dimension, Maria.
Hmm.
And again, and one of the things we would probably do is we'll pull up the zoning map, we'll pull up, the routes, we'll pull up existing sewers and we'll try and develop a map from that, a floating zone from that.
It's also tied into the zoning. It's almost all R10 and R20, though there is some R30 in there as well.
One
So
thing,
we-
Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate is if staff is working on your behalf on trying to establish some overlay district, that we have 1 or 2, maybe 3 members as a subcommittee to help refine those lines so we can try and expedite this in the next 4 weeks.
I'll
Yeah.
volunteer.
I'll
Amy.
volunteer.
All right.
This is Jay. I think one thing that we can do, I certainly can do, is I can export the future sewer survey, the future sewer service area shapefile to ArcGIS Online map and share it with everybody. And you can turn on the aerial and get a feel for it, and then maybe use that as a homework assignment to identify areas where within that area it's not compatible or it is compatible. Come back and, take the input from the board members to come up with a consensus as to what works and what doesn't work. Something that's basically a baseline map that you are all looking at that's the same.
Jay, can you send me that shape file as well in an email?
No,
Okay. Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can.
I have to check with our GIS coordinator to see if distribution of the file is
Let's
appropriate.
don't ask John Schock because he will say no.
I don't know, do you have any connections in the GIS department, Paul?
She doesn't like me.
So Amy, from a procedural standpoint, and I mentioned subcommittee, and I think literally almost everybody on the board raised their hand. So would it be appropriate? No, would it be appropriate if we establish the map, we distribute it to the commission, the board members, and they send us feedback? They don't
Absolutely. Yep,
They don't-
absolutely.
not talk amongst each other and build consensus between groups of 2 or 3. But if we provide information to you and you have conversations with me as the director, that's perfectly appropriate. And from those conversations, I'll cobble together a proposal for a overlay district.
That's exactly how it should work, Jamie. I want to stay away from subcommittees where it's gets into real hairy territory with open meetings, and exactly how you suggested it is how it should work.
Sounds
The
good.
board's
And
comfortable.
we all volunteered because we're all such hard workers.
I didn't get my hand up fast enough. But,
I'm volunteering now.
all right, so we have that part established. Was there anything else in regards to this ordinance that we want to ask staff? We
I
have
have one more.
questions, Susan?
So originally I'm trying to understand, it was potentially 20% LMI. Is that how this is going to be? Is it 20% LMI development?
Anything over 6 units or more has to have inclusionary zoning.
Yep.
So they're gonna get the bonus.
Is there a way to go a little higher than 20% since the whole spirit of this is to create affordable housing?
When you,
Instead of starting with 8 units per acre, you go to 9 or 10. That's the only way you're gonna do it. And that's where we came back when we said, well, if we go with 12, we're still looking at 15.
the inclusionary zoning requirement of 20% is very, very close to the comp permit requirement of 25%, right? So if you craft an inclusionary zoning requirement that bumps it up to 25, it's an invitation to submit it as a comp permit instead.
And we don't
Actually-
want that.
Just for clarity, Susan, I think your statement is give a larger density bonus to a developer are you looking for them to do more than 20% LMI, or are you looking to bump their density up if they do X number of units affordable?
I don't want to bump the density. I just want more affordable housing.
Okay, yeah, that's gonna push them to the comp permit,
Okay,
to Amy's point.
okay. I get it.
So I think at this point, we had a consensus on 8 per acre.
Yep.
Correct? Okay, and we'll look at the areas within the future sewer area and commercial downtown, commercial neighborhood, and maybe the corridor 138. Any other questions as far as the ordinance, other than where it's gonna go? That Jamie's presented, the staff has presented us with, so at least the staff knows what they're working on for the next meeting. We're just down to location now. Jamie, I had one question in regards to the access to the open space. They had to have a dedicated space. That dedicated space would include the road, correct? Pathway,
The dedicated,
access path. I think it was, where did I put it? All, under open space, common open space G, you had item 7, all dwelling units shall have a dedicated access ways to common open spaces. Would that include the roadway?
no, the intent there is to have pedestrian access. And again,
Okay.
there's a little bit of flexibility there because it's a trade-off where the intent is when you do that the commons, the open space, and you want all the houses directly facing that, and that would be your access to it. You wouldn't want a strip of, we'll call them row houses, where they have to walk onto a road to get to the open space. There would have to be some pedestrian path or asset associated with that, not just dumping a individual sidewalk to a roadway system to walk to
Okay.
that.
All
It's
right, I was
urging
aware of that.
development around common space.
And Jamie, you'll look into any fees that might be able to be waived as well.
If there's consensus to do that, we can look at that.
I was also wanted to make sure that the language is clear enough that the common open space could not be used for parking or additional parking. I know we have a minimum of 1 parking place and a possibility that they can put more. I just want to make sure that the language is clear enough that that should not come out of the common open space, or at least a minimum requirement for the common open space.
Now, Joe, that would be clear to me in the establishment of the regulation that open is independent. It doesn't serve a dual purpose. You couldn't call it your common area and then put invisible structures on it so that on, Thanksgiving or 4th of July, everybody parks on the common open space.
Yeah, and if it's clear enough, that's fine. I was concerned with the language on the additional parking, just that it's impervious. I just wanted to make sure that that stayed separate and distinct from the common space. But if you feel the language is clear.
I'm comfortable with the language that would be clear and distinct and separate. Couldn't be double counted.
Okay. All right, well, it sounds like the staff has their marching orders. If there's nothing else and there's no, I'm sorry, Pam.
Yeah, I just had some other comments about, do you still want to get comments on the?
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, first of all, I liked it. I'm really glad that we're doing that. So I didn't know on the first page where it says, what is the purpose? And I know that we talked about that this would, we talked about some other purposes, but I'm just wondering if it's appropriate for us to say, I know that this isn't standing alone, but what is the purpose of the cottage, kind of like the overarching goal of the cottage community? So I don't know if we want to put that in the design guidelines. The other thing, in terms of under, on the bottom, it shows the images. And I don't know if this was just for example, but we say design variety, and you point to some roofs and stuff, and they don't look different at all to me. So, so anyway, in the photo, you're pointing to it, but they don't look different to me. And then the common buildings probably should be common facilities to match up with the, and I could text this to you guys if you want. Common facilities instead of common buildings, because that's what it says in the text, in the ordinance.
Yeah, if you could send that to me, Tim, that would be
Okay.
really helpful.
Okay,
And we could talk about the clarity on your, is that on the, in essence, the back-to-back 4-page handout that you made the reference to? the
yeah,
Architectural style?
yeah. So I'll send you
Two
guys,
examples.
I'll send you a couple, I'll just take a picture of these and send them to you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, if there's nothing further, we'll go on to the planning board liaison activities. Anybody have anything to report? No?
I just wanted everyone to know that I understand. I was not, I was made aware of it from one of the nonprofits in the state, but the Sustainability Committee is having a panel discussion tomorrow, I believe, at 5:30. So there's that. And our Scenic Roadway Committee has not yet met, and hoping, Jamie and Jay, that you can get that started again, because it's been over a year now, or close to a
Okay.
year.
All right,
Looking to potentially reactivate that board in February or March, Maria.
Excellent, thank you.
To bring. So haven't lost sight of it. It's just we're
Good,
trying to get our head a little bit above water right
Yeah.
now.
I get it.
all right. Updates from planning department?
Maria took part of mine. I was going to let everyone know about the sustainability tomorrow. We'll send a link out probably first thing in the morning. If I can get to it tonight, I'll send that out to everybody. It's in essence a Zoom webinar. If you have the opportunity in the afternoon to join that group. The second aspect, I'd like to thank everybody tonight for the discussion. For me as your staff, extremely helpful to give us direction and guidance on your vision for South Kingston and articulating that through the regulations and feedback and discussion. That greatly appreciated, giving us that discussion and direction.
Okay.
That being said, next month, working with the chairman potentially, I think we have cottage again. So, but focused on where that will potentially be located within the community. And then at one point to really delve into potentially procedural issues associated with the functionality of the board. Ex parte communication, the discussions between members, the interrelationship between membership and staff, and Amy's nodding her head that that may be perfectly appropriate if the time frame allows next month.
Oh, and do we,
Can't lose sight of work program also.
yeah,
We also have farm events on the back burner.
Okay.
Yes.
and do we have a joint work session or not with the town council and the Affordable Housing Collaborative?
I think it was
Yes,
February
that is
3rd.
in the works.
And is there any kind of effort being made? Because obviously our workload goes beyond affordable housing for us to have either a little extra time just to talk about other planning issues with the town council or another meeting. I know they're in the middle of all their budget meetings, but some time to chat with them about the big picture stuff.
Maria, I think there is that opportunity. I don't, I haven't spoken to Rob specifically regarding the agenda for that meeting or how much time is going to be devoted to that. But I know at least one council member at the meeting last night mentioned some items and subjects for discussion with regards to, the status of the comp plan, work program, where we are on the Midding missile with our consultant and how those projects are moving forward. So at least one council member is thinking much broader than just affordable housing.
Okay.
And Amy was in attendance last night, so if, you know, if I missed something that came out of that council meeting, feel free to jump in, Amy.
I guess she's not taking that opportunity. But she is up next for update on legal issues. So now she has to unmute.
Sure. Amy Goins again. So as I think you all know, December, right? I don't think it was, no, it wasn't January. December, the Housing Appeals Board met for the second time to hear the town's argument regarding the Fieldstone Farms appeal. This was the comprehensive permit that was approved with conditions up on Old North Road, Stony Fort Road. The two conditions that the developer challenged were the requirement that they build a sidewalk, that they be required to construct a sidewalk out to Flag Road, I think it was. Yeah, Old North Road to Flag Road, so 6,000-ish feet of sidewalk. They called it $1 million sidewalk. That condition, the Housing Appeals Board did not uphold. They kicked that condition out. I should also note the board has voted but not yet issued a written decision. When they issue their written decision after legal counsel drafts it, I'll send that to staff and they'll forward it to you. The condition that was upheld was the requirement that the preliminary plan submittal basically have a total redesign of the LMI and the market rate housing. Remember that this one, all the LMI units were proposed as accessory apartments, and SHAB agreed with our argument that one, it was going to be impossible to enforce the deed restrictions, as the monitoring agency told us. And two, that it didn't meet the requirement in state law that the affordable units be compatible in style and integrated with the market rate units. So I'd call that really a win for us, because the sidewalk was always going to be kind of subject to a second look at preliminary anyway. We haven't had any communication with Attorney Landry as far as next steps for him. There may be a further appeal to court. There may just be a, coming back to the drawing board. We'll have to wait and see. And as soon as I hear anything, I'll let you know. But I would bet he'd reach out to planning staff first. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Amy, I just have a clarification. In regard to the sidewalk, I thought I recalled that they didn't get behind that because they said that that was a preliminary plan issue, not a conceptual master plan issue, correct?
Huh.
Yeah, it was, we really conceded that argument when it came up at argument. We said it was always going to be subject to, let's see what the engineering is. Let's see what the traffic study turns out to be. And if it turns out there really isn't a need for it, that could be reconsidered. So that was something that was always kind of up for a second look anyway at the next stage of review.
Amy, this is Joe. I'm interested in the discussion on the LMI units. I remember our condition of approval, or at least I thought it was, is that the LMI had to be representative of the market rate. So if 25% of the single family houses, 25% of the single family houses should be LMI, 25% of the ADU should be. Did they have any additional discussion in relative to that, or just what was the discussion of that?
The discussion, as far as I understand it, and we'll all get clarity on this once the written decision comes out, but the discussion, as far as I understand it, was the condition is upheld in its entirety. So, right, the condition is the preliminary plan must depict a minimum of 25% of the single household detached structures as deed restricted LMI housing, and the development of LMI housing units as accessory apartments is not going to work. So I think it was significant that this was, I think, the first case SHAB had seen where the LMI units were all to be provided as accessory apartments. And that, I think, just went a little too far, even for a board whose purpose is to promote the development of affordable housing.
And the reason why I
They had
asked that
located them
question,
all.
the reason why I
Right.
asked that question is because often on other projects, and I know one of them that may have gotten away from us, but we try to push for that as much as possible, that they should be representative, number of bedrooms, the single family, you know, and just wanted to understand how solid a ground we're on to try to make them as representative as the market rate.
I think a developer would be wise to, you know, if they came in with a proposal like this, don't have all the LMI units be accessory apartments and all of the accessory apartments be LMI units. There should be a mix, right? So I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with the strategy, and it's in the comp plan of accessory apartments as infill development and promoting LMI housing at different levels, not just, you know, detached single family homes, but small units that are good for empty nesters or workforce housing. You know, they tried to use that against us. They tried to say, well, you told us this is what you wanted, but in reality, it just didn't work. I think it just didn't pass the test with that development being designed as it was.
Plus, they located them all along North Road, Old North Road. They weren't integrated. And I think Amy had said too, I mean, accessory apartments are allowed by right. So they weren't really offering anything. So,
Amy, this is Paul. I had the opportunity to watch that hearing, and my sense was that they weren't at all wishy-washy about this. They came down pretty solidly on the side of wanting to see things integrated and, you know, sort of following the letter of the law. They weren't shy about saying that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think we should all feel good about this.
yeah, you will see a letter. You've probably already seen it from Peter in regards to our hearing on Thursday.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into that specifically because it's
Yeah.
not on for tonight, but I will just tell you in general terms, and some of you may have heard me say this, if there's a way that we can, that the board can approve with conditions versus denial, it's going to come to SHAB in a better posture. That's just a general statement, especially where, you know, we don't want to become a town that has multiple, you know, has a, you know.
Track record.
Yes, exactly. We don't want to have a track record of being against affordable housing. So to the extent we can work with the developers through the process and before the process even starts, to get those developments to conform to what we'd like to see, we will be better off, because it is difficult, as you know, as you've heard me and Peter say recently with some of the projects we've got in the hopper now. It's difficult sometimes with the standards, the special standards for comprehensive permits to deny them.
Can I
Okay,
ask a question for Amy?
go
Hi,
ahead.
Amy, this is Susan. Does the requirement that units be occupied simultaneous to market rate units, how does that factor in with rental units where a homeowner would then be renting the apartment? Like, I was at the SHAB also, but I don't remember that part of it, but can you tell me how the simultaneous part of this works with apartments?
That's a good question that I don't have all the answers to, because that, to me, is really about the issuance of the certificate of occupancy and the goal of, for each unit. And the goal of that requirement is to make sure that you don't have a developer who builds all the market rate units, gets them permitted with COs and buyers lined up, and then says, hey, I'm out of money to construct the affordable units. So that's really the goal. So it's, I think occupancy in that sentence should be read as legal occupancy versus actual occupancy, because once it's permitted and once you've got occupants lined up, then it goes to the monitoring agency. And there's a lot I have to learn about how the different monitoring agencies actually do what they do. But my understanding from that discussion was they have limited resources to, they don't come out and do spot checks and, it's reviewed at the time of sale. It should be reviewed when a new tenant comes in, but how that works out in actuality, I can't speak to.
Okay. All right. Any more questions for Amy? Any other questions or comments from board members? And I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Joe, seconded by Maria. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.